Welcome to another episode of Nurah Speaks, and I'm your host, Nurah Muhammad. Thanks for joining me for episode 276 of the podcast. I'm glad that you are back with me. And as I mentioned in the previous episode titled Another Boycott, I mentioned as we have Independence Day approaching July 4th that I would talk about independence and whether we can say that we are experiencing independence. I think based on last week's episode, I think the evidence suggests that, in fact, we are not. And so this episode is titled Liberty or Death, Independence Day. And when I think about liberty and independence, not only does the Revolutionary War of the United States comes to mind, but as we are approaching the 250th anniversary of the United States and what it means for a united state, a nation in unity, states in unity as a nation, I have to reflect on the founding father, Patrick Henry, and his famed quote and his oft repeated quote, give me liberty or give me death. And, that speech or that excerpt is from a speech that he gave in 1775 when he and other founders and politicians and speakers were talking about and deciding what action that this nation or the colonies, the states would take in rebellion against England and what they viewed as the tyranny of England upon the colonies here on this side of the pond, if you will. And so Patrick Henry and others gave their speeches and delivered the remarks that they thought were appropriate actions that should be taken. And so I think that it's important to provide a fuller context of his speech. And so I'll share some of that. But essentially, he was calling to arms to go to war against England. And was it better to be in peace if slavery was the price for peace, or would it be better to fight? This is what Patrick Henry said. Why stand we here idle? Which is it that gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. Now, those are some very, very powerful words. And some of us are confronted with choices, right? Do we go ahead with what would be, quote, peaceful, the status quo, leave things as they are? Is fighting and is war so offensive that we would remain in what is, quote, peace, in what he and others determined was a tyrannical rule, injustice, inequity, unfairness? Or is it better to pay the price of liberty? And the price in this instance was war, and to fight for that. And I think that that speech, the entirety of the speech and the notion of the Revolutionary War that took place is something that, Black folks in America should really study. Now, I remember learning about the Revolutionary War in social studies in elementary school and learning that Crispus Attucks, this Black man was the first to die in the Revolutionary War. And I think at a time where Black folks were enslaved, were brutalized, where property had no freedom, had no liberty, at a time that men in this nation were fighting for their liberty from England. And does that teach us anything? Is that a model for us for anything? And I think it is. I believe that it is. And we may look at the Emancipation Proclamation as our being freed in the United States and the posture and position that we have now as a people, 400 years freed from slavery and yet remaining in a very dependent position in a time where we were the property of others. Every aspect of our life was governed, not by ourselves, but governed by those who owned us. And so that sort of remains true today. that we have no governance of ourselves. The last episode, I shared some of what a TikToker said about their communities. It was an Asian TikToker, and he said, we have Chinatown and we have Koreatown. And you can say, well, they are still governed by the rules and the laws of the United States. And in fact, they are. But they still have carved out something for themselves that is specific to them, where they can, meet their needs, educate their children, have places for their families to go. That that is theirs. That is governed by their own internal government within the broader government of the United States of America, and they are not in rebellion to the states, or they're not in rebellion to the federal government, but they know that they are a distinct and unique people with ethnic traits and beliefs and rituals and things that are just very unique to them. And they capture that in these communities of Chinatown and Koreatown, where those particular parts of their identity can be celebrated, can be practiced, whether it's through their worship, their recreation, their food and restaurant culture, all of that can be practiced. And so we look at our people and we say, well, what is it that we're doing to address, to meet our needs? Something that we've carved out for ourselves in the broader context of the US, but something that is significant to us. And we can't claim that we have much of that. And we are, a big population within the US, and yet we don't have our stamp. And I don't think that we can say, well, we have our urban communities or the Black community that we still don't govern. We are still governed by others. And in many urban communities where there's not a strong tax base, we're still funded by the county government, by the state government, because many of our communities are so impoverished that we don't have a strong tax base that we can use to fund our communities. So a lot of the money that these communities have are not generated from within the community. And so Black people in America remain in a very vulnerable position of dependence and dependent on others. If I'm talking about, for example, an urban environment that is impoverished, well, then you're dependent on the county, or you're dependent on funding from the state. Your schools are dependent on funding from the state. And so we have to think about the vital and critical time that we're in this nation, that this nation, in fact, is in. And if this nation is in a crucial and vital time, what about us? And the wars that's going on around the nations. I mean, nations are fighting for land, they're fighting for territory and to feed themselves, to make sure that they have clean water, the ability to protect themselves. And so what are we producing, Black people in America? What are we producing to address the needs that we have, that we can barter with at a time where we can be experiencing an extreme condition? I mean, I think COVID was some sort of a social experiment when we can look and say, whoa, whoa, whoa. If we did not have the opportunity to go outside of our communities for food, or if others didn't bring food in, what would we do? And so what are we producing that we could even barter with? The ability to sing, to rap, to dance, to throw a football, hit a home run or dunk a basketball. That is not something that we can trade we can trade with. We don't have much, and we are in a very critical time, and we can look and see others, people who are survivalists and things like that, and we could think that these people are just extreme. These people are like Noah, talking about there's a flood coming, the sky is falling, and they're just alarmists. Or do they know something, and are they preparing for something that we are just ignorant of, we are just ignoring? Or do we think that when we reach a critical time that others would be willing to take care of us? Do others care so much about us and our children that they would take from their own and care for us? What are we producing tangibly that we can trade for goods or services to put into to get food to put into the bellies of our children if we're not going to be farming and growing our own food and growing our own livestock as we're being educated in the colleges and universities of the US. Are we acquiring skills and know-how and bringing that know-how back to be able to produce something to care for our own people? The idea that we don't have clinics and hospitals where, I mean, listen, we know the distrust that we have with the American medical system. We see the distrust that brothers and sisters in these African nations have with the medical system or the charitable organizations that go there from abroad. They have suspicion. We have our own suspicion. Are we being treated fairly? Are we being experimented on? I mean, we have all of this concern and suspicion, and rightfully so. And if we do, are we producing people from amongst our own that we can trust? Are we caring enough to create our own clinics, our own hospitals, so that we can deal with the health of our people, deal with the health of our children, deal with the maternal health, the reduce the infant mortality, reduce diabetes and heart disease and hypertension and all of these conditions that we have. Are we producing medical practitioners that we can trust, that we can go to? Are we helping them establish clinics where they can operate freely? I mean, we have to really think about what would we do if we didn't have others to depend on in meeting our needs? If Caucasian people, if Asian people, if Jewish people, and every group decided that they're not going to be bringing timber to build homes for us, if they decided that they're no longer going to supply us with natural gas or electricity or supply our communities with food or water because we're in a critical time and they need to preserve what they have for themselves, what would we do? I mean, we should be thinking about this, liberty or death and Independence Day. Others can claim an Independence Day. I don't know that we can without establishing something where we are independent of others. We are a totally dependent people, and that makes us vulnerable. I'm on social media and I see where some Black women are talking about how they never want to be dependent on a man. I don't ever want to have to depend on a man because men can take advantage of us if we're dependent. I need to have my own because I don't want to be vulnerable. Now, we understand independence in that context, but when I talk about Black people, Black Americans, and those who have experienced the horrors and continue to experience the trauma of generations that are up from this chattel slavery in the US, now all of a sudden we don't understand dependence or the need to be independent. But we see others recognizing the importance of it, recognizing the importance of saying, listen, we have to get some earth and we have to grow our own foods. And listen, I know that there are outliers within our community that are doing this, but are we supporting them? Are we helping them grow so that they can reach more people? And often we're not. Sometimes we are just so complacent with the status quo, but that's just not going to help us when times get so critical, when times are, and we are so vulnerable, and we would have wished that we had pushed our children to go into medicine and then help them establish clinics, hospitals, where they can practice and treat us. Folks who are interested in agriculture. I mean, everyone wants to be an entrepreneur, but what does that even mean? I think that social media has painted a picture of what it means to be an entrepreneur as if we can just sit in front of a camera, iPhone or Samsung Galaxy, record a video and pretend that we're living a high life. Right now, people who go to social media, you're better off going when you can talk about the foundation that you've established. And you can say, well, Nora, you're doing the same thing. But no, 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 I'm part of a community who has a foundation and are growing that foundation. And you can learn more about that by visiting temple20.org, about the community that I'm a part of that is educating our children, that is buying property and wanting to develop it so that we can begin meeting our own needs. Now, I'm a part of a community that's doing this, and I'm encouraging each of us to develop communities where we live, where we can unite our resources, our know-how, our skill sets, so that when we have a critical juncture, we don't have to panic. And I'm a part of a community when we don't have to panic. When COVID happened, we didn't have to panic because we had done the work already to establish a foundation so that when we hit that critical time, we were prepared for it. And that's what I want us to be. I don't want us to be so vulnerable that if the world turned against us, what will we have anything to do with? What could we do if the world said we're no longer going to meet your needs because we are at a stage where we have to think about our own? And so just thinking about our people, it reminds me of the fable of the grasshopper and the ant. Now, if anyone has read Aesop's fables, you know that a fable is just a story to prove a moral point, to teach a lesson. The grasshopper and the ant is, I think, really reflective or representative of the experience that we see within our own community. And so I'm going to read it to you. It's pretty brief. This is the grasshopper and the ant. One bright day in late autumn, a family of ants were bustling about in the warm sunshine, drying out the grain they had stored up during the summer, when a starving grasshopper, his fiddle under his arm, came up and humbly begged for a bite to eat. What? Cried the ants in surprise. Haven't you stored anything away for the winter? What in the world were you doing all last summer? I didn't have time to store up any food, whined the grasshopper. I was so busy making music that before I knew it, the summer was gone. The ants shrugged their shoulders in disgust. Making music, were you? They cried. Very well. Now dance. And they turned their backs on the grasshopper and went on with their work. We've been like the grasshopper. Everyone else has been preparing something for their own people, as any self-respecting, self-concerned people do, right? I mean, if my neighbor needs something, I have to make sure that my household is straight before I can decide or assess if we have it to spare for the neighbor. We have to get our own house in order. And other people are getting their houses in order, except us. And so I hope this episode is a nudge, is a warning, is an encouragement for us to think about what we have to do as we are reaching a critical stage in this time in the world. Are we going to be the ant or are we going to remain as the grasshopper? Liberty or death, Independence Day. Can we talk about an independence without kind of piggybacking or trying to grab onto the broader context of the independence that the United States is celebrating their independence from England? Where were we in 1776? Where were we? Who were we? And what were we in this nation? Remember, we were property. And 250 years later, after the freedom that the emancipation and the abolishment of slavery in this nation, where are we now? Are we still a dependent people waiting for others to do something for us that we can and should do for ourselves? At least begin preparing something for ourselves and for our future. Or will we remain as the grasshopper? Thank you for listening to this episode of Nurah Speaks. Come back next week for another episode and we'll talk about things that are relevant and important for our community. Make sure you subscribe to Nurah Speaks on YouTube or follow or subscribe where you are streaming this episode. You can also leave me a comment on Facebook, on Instagram, or on YouTube. I'm always interested in your thoughts. I'm always interested in what you would like to hear about on the podcast. But thank you again for being a valued listener. I do this as a service and labor of love for my people and my community. Again, until next time, stay in peace.
We were brought here as a piece of property. And to keep that piece of property, it is to not allow the property to know the value of the property. What I mean by that, if you had known the history of yourself, you would not have been made a slave. And you won't be a slave now if you have a knowledge of yourself. It's hard to enslave a person that have equal knowledge with you. You just can't do it. And so this knowledge of yourself is the thing that will free you from what you have been suffering from.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Nurah Speaks. Look out for a new episode coming at you fresh next week. And if you want to learn more about me and the work that I do, you can visit my website, nurahspeaks.com. Or if you have a listener question, you can email me at nurah@nurahspeaks.com. You can also follow Nurah Speaks on X, Instagram, and Facebook at Nurah Speaks. I will be sure to include links in the show notes. If Nurah Speaks has value to you, please subscribe, rate, and review, and share with family and friends. And be sure to check out previous episodes. And remember, don't just join the movement, be the movement. Stay in peace.